So let's dive right into the water, shall we? It's 1975. The classic film Jaws is released and becomes Hollywood's first ever summer blockbuster. So, one of the unintended successes of this masterpiece stemmed from continuous failures of the mechanical shark. So, if you know the name that the cast gave the shark, why don't you go ahead and drop it in the chat? So throughout my presentation, I'm going to ask some questions and let's have a lively chat period and make this fun while hopefully you learn a few things. So we're going to have a bit of fun. So unable to show Bruce the shark on screen as much as he wanted, Spielberg was forced to use more creative cinematography and let our imaginations fill in the gaps. And boy, did they. So here's my thesis for today. Reality mimics fantasy. The truth is, what we don't see can hurt us. And with APIs, they are a seemingly ever expanding group of prey lying beneath the surface of our applications, out of sight and out of mind, as the danger to them also grows unseen and lurking in the depths until, with little warning, we find ourselves in the teeth of our attackers. And no doubt, there is likely to be blood in the water. All right, I like a little drama to kick open my sessions. So, I mean, why do I care about API security? Dan is kind of clued in a bit. I've been, let me give you a little context. I've been with Smart Data for a decade now. It's a software and data consulting company. We have about 130 staff. We work with a wide variety of enterprises, assisting them in a wide variety of today's. But for today, the important connection is this, that we do lots of API work for our customers. And so for us, and for me specifically, it's important that the people we send into those environments understand how to build APIs securely. And really, that's no different than many CTOs and IT management who are working to build applications. We need to make sure our staff are well trained. So that's one of the reasons. The second is I'm also the CTO at our sister company, CMBS. And CMBS is an SAP solutions provider. It has both a payment portal product and an e-commerce platform that both integrate with SAP's ERP solutions. So both of these products use APIs heavily, and they're sold to global companies who are high value targets for hackers. And just please note that I'm using the term hacker or hacked. I'm just broadly referring to any way that people might seek to take inappropriate advantage of your company through the use of technology. Katie and Ben in the previous sessions were showing you effectively how to do just that. So third, I mean, we're all online data. We all use our phones, mobile apps, just all APIs going everywhere. We should all be demanding that more is being done to keep our data secure. That should be pretty obvious. And also because I don't want to be called by the FBI again. Yes, we have already been a target. And this is likely maybe the first you have heard of us, but it's not likely the first that hackers have heard of us. So don't think that if your company is obscure, that protects you. It doesn't. So important. That's why I care about API security. Moving on to our next slide here. There we go. So let's review my claims and start going through them from my thesis. All right, so my first claim is that APIs are an ever expanding group of prey. And honestly, I shouldn't have to work too hard to convince you all of this. Still, I want to take a look at the market size for API management so we get some kind of sense of what the growth looks like. So Gartner estimated the API management market in 2013 to be $70 million. In 2020, just 7 years later, that was up to $660 million. So we're definitely on the upswing. But is that going to taper off? Well, 4 years later, 5.24 billion. So anybody, folks want to take a guess in the chat what it was in 2029? Put some numbers in there. And it is 16 billion. So my next point, the danger is growing. So Akamai, if you're familiar with that security company, they have a study they published called the API Security Impact Study. The 2024 version It surveyed a whole bunch of CIOs, CISOs, and security professionals, and if they found that 84% of respondents experienced an API security event in the last 12 months. Now, that's not just a security event, that's an API security event specifically, and that is just in the last 12 months. 2023, it was 78%, and that's the third year in a row that that has increased. So those are pretty significant numbers, and we are talking just about API security incidents alone. So anyone want to hazard a guess as to one of the reasons why that might be increasing? Just maybe I talked about this on a previous slide. I mean, yes, there's just way more APIs accessible out there, and therefore, naturally, they are a much bigger target. That's not the only reason these attacks are growing. We'll look at it. Another one of my claims that the dangers are unseen and lurking in the depths. So my claim here is that IT security departments are not clued in yet. And how do I know this? So, as mentioned at CMBS, we sell our payment portal, and we sell it to primarily large enterprise and global companies. If you're running SAP, you're typically a giant company. And when we sell them our payment platform, their IT security departments, they make us go through this lengthy security review process. And no matter how much documentation I sent to them ahead of time, begging them to read it, I I end up having to answer some 20 or 30-page document with like 100 or more questions about every perceivable question about security that they can think of. Guess, okay, another question time. Guess, and really just think about the conference that you're attending. Guess what three-letter acronym is not mentioned ever? All right, so put your answers in the chat. If they're not all API, then you're not listening. So a second point, now to sort of too quickly on the slides, a second point, I was at an API security group meetup, and I asked the question, okay, so good on you if you're securing the APIs that you develop, but how do you know that the third-party apps that you have or can access your customers' data are properly securing their APIs? What was the accepted answer? Well, that's on the vendor to make sure that they are secure. So I had to wonder, like, is that a reasonable deflection? Has anyone ever heard of companies getting hacked due to third-party vendor tools? Why don't you throw some examples in the chat? Um, I have solar panels and it's windy. I'm going to throw that as a little hint into some of them. That's often an attack vector for companies. So we definitely need to think about our third-party vendors also. So how many of you had this kind of experience, still on this theme of unseen and lurking in the depths? So you go to your IT management and you say, we need to protect our website and our network. And everyone's like, yeah, we get that. We've been doing this for years. This is good. Then you say, well, we need to better protect our APIs. And honestly, a lot of folks will ask and have asked, hey, what is that? What are APIs? And that's problematic. And that might not be the case. IT management is getting better about API awareness, but I'll challenge that we are getting better at getting a handle on this, but we'll talk about that shortly. So let's say you explain to them and they're like, okay, great. But often I would see the answer back, all right then, how many APIs do we have in our company? What kind of data are they exposing? And which are publicly accessible? And you know what I see often the teams respond with? Let me get back to you. The reality is development teams, we're also part of the problem. We're not taking API security seriously enough. We're not even taking the time to help our organizations know what APIs we're building and what's out there and what data we're exposing and all that kind of stuff. It's hidden and nobody's giving us grief about it. They just want the next story built and away we go. So that's definitely a problem. The last thing I said in my opening, there's likely to be blood in the water. So Dan has actually tons of pretty fascinating stories about the blood that has already been spilled. I've enjoyed listening to some of those stories, but instead of me rehashing some of those, let's do a quiz instead. So here's your first question. Okay. So back to that Akamai API impact study that I mentioned. So in 2023, what percentage of respondents said they had a full inventory of APIs and whether or not they returned sensitive data? So go ahead, take your best shot at it. What do you think it is? Put your answer in the chat. We'll see if any of you get close. All right, here we go. Here's the answer. The answer was 40%. Okay. So that was 2023. Well, I mean, it was somewhat better than I expected. That's not bad, but it's still not great when you think that 78% of those people, same people, said they had an API security incident. So only 40% of them having a handle on what they needed to secure. It kind of makes sense when then in 2024, 84% of them now get an API security incident. It's like kind of a hacker gold mine. Hey, if no one's looking at the door, let's hop in. Okay, so here's your second question in our little 2-question mini quiz. What was the percentage in the 2024 survey? And apparently I missed the word the. Not important. So 2023 was 40%. What do you think it was in 2024 after they had all these API security incidents? Yeah, 27%. Honestly, I was shocked when I saw that number. I also still had another 3-letter acronym as my response. It wasn't API. It might have started with a W, and it wasn't wow, although wow is definitely part of that expression. How is it that we're going down in just even getting a handle on what APIs we have available and what we're producing and what data is there? I mean, we're going in the wrong direction. So, what are our challenges to dealing with this? And I really think that there's 3 big challenges here. There's also, lots of a variety of them, but the 3 I think that at my level we're dealing with is the following. Okay, number 1, obscurity still. And I mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention it again. The folks like the AppySec team are working to change that, and I love that. But we all need to join in building awareness of the issue within our organizations. It's completely within our power and abilities to change this and not have it be obscure. Just don't wait till it's your blood in the water. Scale, okay? This is I'm working on a new country song for QA testers like Katie. It's called "I Got Just One Website but 63 APIs." So again, we're building APIs, and APIs are calling APIs that are calling APIs. It's kind of all over the place, and really, it's okay. Like I could great and go in and hack one API or 2 API, but I talk to organizations that have hundreds and hundreds of APIs. So scale is an issue for us. Automation. The reality is attackers are going full auto and starting to use AI. I've seen customer of ours who get bots coming at them. And the interesting thing is they're using a lot of the same tools that testers use to automatically test sites. They're using those same tools to hack your sites. And so um, I watched in another session here at AppySec, one of the hackers using AI to help them attack an API. So, I mean, there's that automation is a challenge that we're going to have to deal with, the automation of our attackers. All right, so let's take a look at some recommendations. Okay, um, remember Chief Brody? What was his recommendation? Um, put your answer in the chat. But if you're not familiar with Jaws, you won't know. But if you are, it's a great line. You're gonna need a bigger boat. I mean, that's a fantastic recommendation. We're gonna and I agree with it. So, but let's get on to sort of a few high-level recommendations. I'm going to get a little bit deeper. So number 1, back to the obscurity. I'm going to take a bite at this again. The best thing you can do at your company is start yelling, there's a shark in the water. Like, people need to understand and be aware that this is a real attack vector that needs real attention. Know what you're protecting. I'm going to say this one more time. We have to get serious about getting a handle on our APIs, the data they're exposing. We should be asking our vendors about their API security. How are they protecting our data that's being exposed in their APIs? Fight fire with fire. Yeah, it's time to call in the big guns. If we are being honest, manual testing will be overwhelmed, and automation, in my opinion, truly is the bigger boat you need to use to protect our APIs. Now, I am not saying, Katie, stop manual testing. Hopefully, you're at Katie's session just before mine. It was a great session. So, not saying stop manual testing, but actually automation will actually help your manual testers be more technical, and you can use them more technically. So, combine the two together. Take some action. Like, don't just leave this conference and change nothing. If you're already pursuing API security actively, great. But if not, get your organizations engaged. This one should be dead obvious, but I just wanted to call it out for those of you who are not familiar with AppySec University. They have a ton of free courses on um, uh, API security. It's a great place to start. They didn't ask me to say that, but it's a fantastic resource, and definitely pass it to our staff and teams. So I recommend it for each of you also. All right, let's get on to, can you give us a little more detail? Like, how big does that boat need to be? So I'm going to go through some of kind of the standard things that I will talk about with our teams and that we like to look at and consider. We don't do all of these things all of the times. Again, we're a bunch of different environments, but they should all be um, considered as a good starting point. So number one, I call these the basics. Obviously, you should be using TLS and encrypting your traffic these days, but strong authentication and also strong authorization. And what I see often cases that authentication is good and authorization is weak. Once I have the right token, I could go in there, I can do things that probably I shouldn't, that the user interface doesn't let me do, but the API does. So that is something to definitely look at. Your dev team should have API standards that also establish secure API development practices. API should absolutely enforce the same security, validation, and business rules as the UI, if not more. It is unconscionable today that we have APIs that let you do everything and just the UI stops you. Like, we should know that the API should be tougher to get through. But unfortunately, that's not the case in a lot of organizations, and we absolutely need to change that. Limit the data that is going out the door. Can't tell you how many times I've seen it where organizations want to build one customer API, and then you call that customer API, and it gives you all the data about the customer, 10 times more than you actually need for your call. But that's that. So there's so much better ways to do that. You can still have the same one API and just get the data you need specifically for your UI. So like, um, absolutely work at just protecting that data at all costs. Only expose what you really need. You can encrypt and obfuscate on top of the TLS stuff where appropriate. I've seen customer places where they'll obfuscate customer IDs, and that helps with, hey, just even you're on screen or whatever, or they're doing hacking. Like I saw in some events hacking where it's like exposing customer IDs. Like, so obfuscation is another way you can do to you, um, help protect your data. If possible, use an API gateway to monitor and inventory all API traffic. Some of the larger companies that I've talked with, they will require that everything goes through their API gateway. Sometimes some of them built their own, but a lot of them nowadays buy tools and use different tools. And that will allow you to get a sense of at least what you have, what's going on, what data is being exposed, and definitely helpful, but it's not possible in every scenario. Build the automated API security right into your DevOps pipelines. I mean, everybody should be well into DevOps. You can do code scanning tools, but also you can have API security tools that will go and hit your APIs. And although, like Katie mentioned, they're not going to cover every single scenario, but then you can, again, save your manual testers to focus on those really sensitive APIs and get in there, but have your automated tools really take care of, like, are your API headers good, and is your role-based access control good? Like, there's a lot of things that can be done with automation, and really it's critical. I've seen a number of talks, people talking about WAFs and stuff like that. Yeah, consider services that will help detect when you're under attack. Some of them from the big network companies, they're kind of plug and play, and they'll do everything for you, and they've got a lot of AI and a lot of stuff in there, and that's great. They also can cost you $60K a year. So it can be more expensive, but then there are other platforms, your cloud platforms and stuff. It's a little bit more do it yourself, but you can certainly still fend off those attacks for a lot less money. So finally, my last, Katie mentioned this also, but the OWASP API Top 10, it's a great place. OWASP is a great resource. We use the OWASP Zap tool for doing our front end scanning in a variety of environments. And the API Top 10 is another great list to take a look at and make sure that you're up on what the latest is happening in API hacking. So I appreciate you all coming to my talk today. I hope that it was at least slightly entertaining and that you're a little bit more motivated now to take action on API security and to keep your head above water.
Chris, that was awesome. Do you mind flipping back a slide? Because I thought that this is a really helpful thing. I bet a lot of people were screenshotting this. I appreciate you like putting some really like specific and tactical things in here. And it's funny when you asked the question, what percent of people thought they have a full inventory? We all guessed way lower than 40%.
Yeah.
And as soon as the 40% came out, we were like, no, that's not right. That's just, people fooling themselves. It's kind of not a surprise that the number went down.
Yeah. That's a good point. I would say that maybe I wonder if they came to the truth of it when they were asked again versus if it. Yeah.
I saw a comment from my buddy Alex, like, oh, maybe they got a little more realistic over time. But I did want to pop up a couple of comments here, questions. Another great one from Ray. Thank you. And we didn't ask you to plug this, so totally appreciate it. But I think it brings up a good point, right? So Ray likes to combine AppSec Scanner, right, for automating testing and fuzzing, and combine that with manual, right? And listening to Katie in the last session, she's heavy on manual, but that takes a high level of sophistication, right? Like the things she's doing is really clever, right? So like, how do you approach it?
So, I mean, it's a great question, and I would love to hire, if I could afford to it, and there existed 100 Katies.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
But the reality is you can't. And so it has to be where you need to be tactical, as I said, in how you approach that API security. So one of the things that we did, so on the payment portal, so we have to go get a pen test. We pay like a top security company to go in and go throughout the whole application platform. But even still, we also run the AppSec security tool on our APIs, and it found a vulnerability, not a strong one, but a medium level one, which we patched up. So the reality is that as much as knowledgeable as the team is, the people who are coming in, and that all they do is like hack sites, and they'll do pen tests, and you'll spend lots of money with them. An automated tool is absolutely fantastic to, and then you're getting that done once a year. right? From my perspective, maybe even twice a year. Where if I have an automated tool, and maybe Katie goes in and makes a change to the test the API, finds it good, and tomorrow a developer goes and makes a change and publishes it. If she like at
Yeah.
a certain point, the automation, and that's why I talked about it, really is the bigger boat that we need to think about. I love having people like Katie to go and like dig in, because sometimes the automation just doesn't get into those really complex use cases, and I understand that for sure.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
it should cover 90, 95, 98% of what we're doing.
Well, there's a coverage problem here, right? Like if you could hire a bunch of Katies, right? Like given the volume of APIs you have, right? Like most organizations just can't throw that kind of horsepower at every API you got. And then you brought up the point, like it's a once a year exercise, for most people, for most organizations. So you're sort of sampling, all right, on the front end, and then you're only doing it, sporadically. And what about all that time in between? I mean, we never push code live without doing functional testing, but security testing, sure, go ahead. We'll worry about that 6 months from now.
I mean, absolutely. And again, we've seen it, and our customers have seen it on both companies where auto, auto, automation tools are being used to come after them. And they're like, they'll
Yeah,
kick it up sometimes they'll kick it up like all of a sudden it's Monday at 6 a.m. and you're getting hammered for
right.
3 hours. And it's like they're just coming at you hard. So um, you don't know when it's coming. They'll turn it on, they'll turn it off, but they're using
Right.
all kinds of crawling tools and things. It is definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
And I definitely automate. We need to fight fire with fire.
Well, and some of the things that Katie mentioned, like the first thing she goes for is authentication, right? Like, let me find endpoints that don't have good authentication or no authentication, right? Well, that's a completely automatable thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, you shouldn't have to brute force that by hand, right? And that can run continuously and so forth. And it's remarkable how many breaches are because APIs with no authentication on it, right? It's like the lowest of the low hanging fruit, and yet, if you've seen it in my talks in the fundamental square, like, good percentage of API breaches are unsecured endpoints.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the out of sight, out of mind problem, and that is a real issue in our industry. We have to come to grips with stop building APIs and just putting them out there, and then telling our front end people to secure their website. Like, doesn't work.
Well, I think on that note, Chris, thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise here. And we have some more fun stuff planned with you and Smart Data in the coming weeks. So everyone should stick around and pay attention.